Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for dialing in early to listening to this webinar. This is Jenny. I cannot turn on my camera currently because I'm at a government agency, where cameras are not allowed. So I'm being compliant at this moment. But nonetheless, it wouldn't hinder your learning process from listening from Veronica's input. So before we let her begin, just a quick overview. So Veronica, I'm sure you are not unfamiliar with her. She oversees the safer cyberspace portfolio in the CSA environment, where she leads the development of cybersecurity risk assessment frameworks to help organizations manage their digital risk. Veronica takes an active interest in emerging technologies and was previously involved in developing technology roadmaps for emerging tech such as AI and blockchain in the Infocom Media Development Authority. So today, Veronica will take us through on the topic about cyber essential and cyber trust. So I'll hand over the floor to you, Veronica.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. Hi, everyone. Good morning. So I think today's session is really to talk about our plans moving forward for revising cyber essentials and cyber trust. So I think before I begin to babble on about cyber essentials and cyber trust, I thought useful to provide a bit of a background. These are cybersecurity certification that we have developed for organizations, and these are also published as national standards. So we launched these back in 2022, and there's now plans to revise and expand cyber essentials and cyber trust. We will be looking at including areas like cloud security, operational technology security, and artificial intelligence security. So I think for this session, it's really to brief everyone on the background of cyber essentials and cyber trust to prepare for the next steps, which is essentially an invitation to the ISACA community to give us the feedback and inputs to contribute to this upcoming revision. So I think before I jump into cyber essentials and cyber trust proper, I think let us take one step back to ask ourselves, actually, why is cybersecurity important in the first place? So I think what I'm showing here on slides is basically an extract from IMDA's Singapore Digital Economy Report. Generally, most countries would measure their economy in the form of GDP. But I think what is increasingly a trend now is actually to also study the sizing of your own country's digital economy in order to have a sense of where you are in terms of digitalization. And I think this is what IMDA, together with the School of Public Policy, Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, did. And they published a report to show that our digital economy size is about 17.3% and of our GDP. In terms of our technological adoption rate, as well as the technological adoption intensity, if I take your attention to the charts on the right-hand side, you would see that these are on the upward trends. So I think if we were to interpret some of these data points put together, I think generally we can see that Singapore is investing heavily in digital, and this is also why cybersecurity becomes an important consideration. So cybersecurity and digital are definitely kind of like twins. You can't really go digital without thinking about cybersecurity. And at the same time, data is very important as well, especially in the area of personal data protection. So what we have done, CSA together with various teams in IMDA, is to actually put something together that looks like this, that sort of explains the enterprise digitalization journey. And it all starts with digitalization. So you will see the infographic over here that kind of like describes digitalization in 3 stages. Stage 1 is getting ready for the digital economy. Stage 2 is growing in the digital economy. And stage 3 is then leaping ahead in the digital economy. So I think as the organization progresses through the different steps of digitalization, when they first start, generally with digitalization, the unfortunate thing is it expands the attack surface, and therefore the first priority that we always advise organizations to do is to implement basic cyber hygiene, and this will come in the form of the cyber essentials measures. Over time, as the organization progresses in this digitalization journey, chances are it will start collecting data, be savvy about the use of data, and some of this, depending on the business, may potentially be personal data. And this is where then personal data protection measures in the form of the data protection essentials becomes important. And of course, as we move into stage 2, three of the digital economy, enterprises become a lot more mature in their use of digitalization, in their use of technologies, in their collection and use of data. So this is where the rest of the measures, such as the Cyber Trust Mark, as well as the Personal Data Protection Trust Mark, would then start to make sense for organizations. So by kind of like fitting in cybersecurity together with data protection into the enterprise digitalization journey, we actually try to make this easy for organizations so that depending on which stage that they are, they can look at the right areas for them to pay attention to as they go digital. So now let us talk a little bit about the Singapore economy and the breakdown of the organizations in Singapore. The diagram on the left is a triangle, and I'll be honest to say that actually I think it doesn't really differ that much from country to country, but most countries would then have a smallish number of large organizations. And in Singapore's context, this would form 1% of organizations in Singapore, typically the MNCs, as well as the LLEs or the large local organizations. So this is in Singapore's context, typically in the thousands. And then after that, you'll have the next level tier, which will be the medium enterprises, small enterprises, as well as micro enterprises. And in Singapore, SMEs would actually form about 99% of the organizations in Singapore. If you look at the resourcing as well as the threat landscape, it also differs. Right at the top of the triangle, large organizations tend to have a lot more resources for cybersecurity, well-equipped with cybersecurity teams, CISOs, and so on. But as you traverse down to the triangle, generally the smaller organizations may not have that many resources, so they may not necessarily have dedicated IT teams and cybersecurity teams. Of course, in terms of the threat landscape, they would also differ as well. Large organizations are attractive targets, and they could be the subject of both low sophistication, high volume, as well as a lower volume but high sophistication attack. And as you move down the triangle, although they may not be well-known brands and large organizations, I think the fact of the matter is that there could still be victim of large volume but low sophistication attacks as well. So this also tells us that essentially we can't really have like one size fits all standard, or a range of measures simply because organizations are all differ. So what we have done is kind of divided it into two major areas: cyber essentials and cyber trust. So for cyber trust, this is something which is our goal and vision. It takes on a risk-based approach to cybersecurity, and we hope organizations can all eventually get there, where they have the capacity and capability to perform a risk assessment on their organization, figure out whether are they higher risk or lower risk, and basically those at higher risk should then put in place more measures that would bring them to a level that is suited for their risk tolerance. And Cyber Trust provides a guided risk assessment for organizations to be able to make that assessment to match their risk level to their level of cybersecurity implementation. However, early on, I did say that 99% of Singapore's organizations are SMEs, and maybe they do not have cybersecurity teams that are dedicated and to take on a risk assessment process. So what we have done with Cyber Essentials is basically to make it simple for the smaller organizations and list the basic cyber hygiene measures that we think organizations should prioritize, and this will help them to be equipped against common cyber attacks. Okay, so when we have the certification program, this cannot stand alone on its own. And what we need to do is to also design a whole series of efforts to support the certification. So what you see over here is a bit like a staircase diagram of sorts, where we start off with generating awareness. So for organizations who may not even be very familiar or aware of the types of threats or the things that they need to protect themselves with, we have a range of cybersecurity toolkits to help organizations. After they are aware, the next thing is to actually enable organizations to take action. And this will come in the form of cybersecurity consultancy services, where we onboard cybersecurity consultants that can provide services to help their customers prepare. Then, of course, the national standards, Cyber Essentials and Cyber Trust, would form the goal for organizations to reach a minimum level or an appropriate level of cybersecurity. And of course, the crux of today's presentation is actually where we want to actually expand Cyber Essentials and Cyber Trust to include cloud security, OT security, and AI security. So this way, as the organization progresses in its digitalization journey, apart from basic digitalization measures, some are using cloud, some are using AI, and in specific sectors that are in the industrial sectors, they may be looking at OT IT conversions. So by putting all this into the framework, We want to be able to eventually help organizations to manage their digital risk holistically. So I mentioned some of the cybersecurity resources and initiatives for organizations to reach their cyber essentials and cyber trust goal. This slide kind of shows a summary divided into two categories. One category is essentially some of the self-help measures that is made available for organizations. And for those that prefer not to self-help because they lack the resources, then there's also the outsourcing ones that I mentioned in the form of a CISO as a service. So these are also government funding supported, so eligible organizations can get funding support. So let me give a few examples in the next two slides. This is one of the examples of a self-help tool. We worked with IMD to put this online. So this is a simple health check tool for cybersecurity aligned to basic cyber hygiene measures in cyber essentials. So as the company goes through all these measures, they will be able to get a quick sense of where the cyber health is vis-a-vis the cyber essentials measures, and also then have a sense of, based on the industry that they're from, where are they vis-a-vis their peers in the same industry. And of course, if they find that their cyber health results are not so good, they may want to approach the doctor, or they may want to self-help. So then this would be some of the tools that basically helps them. This is a self-assessment readiness check against cyber essentials. And essentially, if organizations want to approach the certification bodies to be certified, this will be the same checklist that they use. So this will be something that allows organizations to get a sense of where they are, what the gaps are, and what are some of the gaps that they need to close. If they need help to close the gap, they can either self-help or to basically rely on a quick overview of how cybersecurity fits into the overall digitalization journey. Let me then go into the history of the approach that we have taken for cyber essentials and cyber trust. Okay, just to recap, the target audience for cyber essentials is really meant to be organizations that are still starting out in their digitalization journey. So the whole intent is not to make it too overwhelming or too difficult for organizations. So this is a list of the cyber essentials measures, 5 major categories that will help organizations be protected from common cyber attacks. So on the left pillar, we always start with our assets. So the fundamental rule in cybersecurity is that if you don't even know your assets, you can't really protect them. So the key assets that we cover over here would be, firstly, people, the most important assets in the organization, sometimes called the weakest link, but we hope to translate them into the first line of defense. Then the next other part of assets will be hardware and software, as well as data. So now that you know what your assets are, the next pillar is then putting in place the right measures to secure and protect the environment as well as the assets, updating them so that you can close the cybersecurity holes, backing them up offline, and basically incident response where you are ready, because it's no longer a matter of if but when. So what was actually the thinking behind cyber essentials when we developed these measures? So it started with a few years ago when we looked around the landscape, and there were a couple of studies published that studied why is it so hard for SMEs to adopt standards in the area of, in this case, information security and privacy. And they found that in general, standards in general are driven by large size organizations. And because of the way they're written, they may not be easily achievable for use by SMEs. So one of the recommendations that ENISA had back then is to actually look at the needs of SMEs and try to create standards that are a bit more tailored for them, make it easy for them to follow so that it's not so difficult and the bar is not so high. So this is something which I think is not just Singapore thinking about it alone. And the slide here actually shows 2 early efforts that we did look at when we started working on our cyber essentials journey. The most early example is probably UK, NCSC, that came up with the UK version of cyber essentials. And their articulation of cyber essentials is actually quite apt. It says that, firstly, this is a scheme that protects the organization against a whole range of the most common cyber attacks. And while cyber attacks can come in different shapes and sizes, the majority are fairly basic in nature, and therefore this is a good starting point for organizations. So the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity also came up with their own version, which is baseline cybersecurity controls for small and medium organizations. So same thing, they said that actually what they try to apply is an 80-20 rule, so that it is actually making it easier and within the financial and human resource means of even small organizations. So this was our two areas of inspiration when we first started the journey a few years ago. Um, so the question is actually, how do you define by cyber hygiene? Although most countries and most industry frameworks have a general alignment, some of them may differ slightly. So one of the areas we looked at is actually the CIS controls that is actually quite accepted in the cybersecurity industry. And what they have is to actually divide the cybersecurity controls and measures into three groups: IG1, 2, and 3. So IG1 is actually focusing on basic cyber hygiene. They say that it's suited for enterprises with limited resources and expertise and to guard against common cyber attacks. So when we worked on Cyber Essentials, we also looked extensively at IG1 to make sure that there is a certain alignment. So I think although this specific document was launched much later on, it also takes reference from IG1, and you can see here that we are able to map most of the measures in IG1 to the Cyber Essentials measures, so that when we recommend what is cyber hygiene, at least this is something that is done taking into consideration industry-leading frameworks being used in the industry, as well as jurisdictional frameworks used in other countries. So what has happened since we launched Cyber Essentials? I think increasingly this movement of the idea of coming up with frameworks and standards that's a bit more lightweight and suited for small organizations actually began to take shape. So I take reference from the NIST cybersecurity framework. It has since been published, but when it went out for consultation earlier on, there was one liner that talked about how Congress explicitly directed NIST to actually consider the needs of small businesses in coming up with a framework. On the right-hand side, another example, and this is now the Cloud Security Alliance. So what they have always had is the CCM, the Cloud Controls Matrix, targeting organizations that put their infrastructure and make use of the cloud. What they eventually came up with is basically a CCM Lite, which was actually intended to address the need of SMEs that have limited resources. So you can see that there's a certain movement around it, that even as we try to develop standards and frameworks for cybersecurity, we don't really it's difficult for us to be able to come up with a one-size-fits-all approach. And sometimes we need a lighter version to make it easier for the smaller organizations to be able to make them achievable. So I think having explained Cyber Essentials, let me now go into Cyber Trust. So to recap, Cyber Trust is for companies that have gone beyond basic cyber essentials, and the whole idea is to encourage them to take a risk-based approach to cybersecurity. So I think what we have here is basically sort of a ladder diagram that shows 5 different tiers in Cyber Trust, and what we have done is to associate a different number of cybersecurity domains to each of the tiers. So I think the thinking is, how do you actually use the tiers to be able to use it for your own needs? Within your organization, what you can do is to use the Cyber Trust risk assessment to be able to determine what your risk profile is. And once you know what your risk profile is, generally, if you're at higher risk, you may want to consider the higher tiers and bring your own risk implementation and exposure into something that's within your tolerance limit. Other organizations actually use Cyber Trust as the framework for them to assess their suppliers. Increasingly, there's a series of cybersecurity supply chain issues. So some are starting to require or impose minimum cybersecurity standards for their suppliers. And usually what they'll do is to look at the project risk. So if this is a high-risk project, then the tier or the requirement could be higher. If this is a medium or lower risk project, then maybe Cyber Essentials could be adequate. Maybe the lower tiers of Cyber Trust could be adequate. So generally what we have done is to adopt a risk-based approach, and this makes it consistent with international certifications such as the ISO 27001. So for Cyber Trust, it's basically a 2-stage assessment. Most of the certification bodies that certify for Cyber Trust also certify for ISO 27001, and this is also a 3-year certification period with 1-year resurveillance audit in between. So the major constructs of high Cyber Trust design is intended to be quite compatible with ISO 27001, and therefore it serves as an effective pathway for organizations that are actually looking for getting international certification if the business needs and requirements are there. So I think this is to share the philosophy and thinking behind cyber trust. One of the studies that we looked into earlier on was actually coming from a European case study. What happened then was that Europe invested significant resources in coming up with a cybersecurity framework. And in quotes, this actually translated to free advice for firms. Although our intent and objective is not to actually take away consulting or the need for consultancy, what they have also shown is that when a framework is made out there with a guided approach, it is effective for companies and it helps them to be able to adopt it. So I think they also said that the benefit was especially pronounced when the cybersecurity framework follows a tiered approach. And you can see that in Singapore, we have taken a tiered approach as well. So I think this is actually not just Singapore doing this, but actually Australia also has a cybersecurity certification. This is actually targeted at SMEs. So basically what they have done is to take on a tiered approach and basically have their standards serve as a pathway to ISO 27001. So you can see actually this is a very similar approach as what we have done in Singapore. And I would imagine that moving forward for jurisdictions that want to put something in place, that should likely be a direction and trajectory that other jurisdictions may follow in time to come. So coming back to cyber trust, what we offer is a guided risk assessment for organizations, where we start off with doing an inherent risk assessment. Then after that, looking at what their measures they have implemented, which comes in the form of a cybersecurity preparedness assessment. So after you put these two together, you would look at the residual risk and ask yourself whether the risks are basically at a level that you're comfortable with through a risk treatment plan. If necessary, you may have to go back and put in place more measures. If not, if you accept the risk or transfer the risk, then basically all this will be surfaced for deliberation and approval. And before going for the certification process, some organizations may take on the optional step of bringing in a third-party consultant to help them with a pre-certification audit to make sure that they're ready first. So in the guided risk in the guided risk assessment, we have also provided a library of risk scenarios. So generally, in order for you to do a risk assessment, you need to outline what the key risks facing the organizations are. To make it easier for organizations, what we have done is to come up with a library of scenarios in a few major categories of areas. Data breach is one, the human factor is one, the infrastructural setup is the other, physical, regulatory and compliance, as well as supply chain. So through this library of risk scenarios, we make it easy for organizations to basically get started in the risk assessment. What we cannot do for them is for them to assess the likelihood and impact. So while we can provide the base template, organizations then look at all of these and assess the likelihood of it happening to them and the impact on their organization in the context of their own operating environment. Okay, so I have kind of like briefly outlined the approach for cyber essentials and cyber trust and some of the next level of details of the current cyber essentials and cyber trust measures. So what would the revisions be about? So firstly, what were we thinking when we said that there is a need to revise? At the start of this presentation, I pulled out a slide from IMD's digital economy. And remember, I said that actually the technology adoption rate and technology intensity rate in Singapore is increasing for organizations. What this translates to in organizational terms is as organizations take on digital transformation, chances are they will be looking at new technology areas, different technology areas. And this slide just shows a few examples, which would be cloud, operational technology for those in the industrial sectors, as well as AI. So what we think is actually as organizations basically start taking on these new technology areas, actually there are a cloud-specific risk, OT-specific risk, and AI-specific risk. And therefore, it is important for us to build all this into the Cyber Essentials framework so that they can support organizations to manage the digital risk holistically. So why cloud? Firstly, let's look at enterprise adoption. I think anecdotally, we would know from our observation of enterprises in Singapore that the adoption has been rising. So based on IMD's statistics, I think we are seeing about 30% of businesses in Singapore using cloud computing. Of course, if you look at the threat landscape, as more organizations move on the cloud, you can also see that the attackers will evolve their tactics, and there will be some that have started specializing in or focusing on cloud-specific attacks. So why OT? So I think if we look at the industrial sectors in Singapore, outside of the CII sectors, actually there's also manufacturing, and manufacturing in Singapore does form a large part of our GDP. If we look at the trends in Industry 4.0, from the time of being a standalone equipment, I think the trends for these equipment is moving towards being connected and basically using the data and adopting technologies in order to do data analysis and so on. So I think as they're getting more connected, it also means that there is an expansion of the attack surface. On the OT threat landscape perspective, I'm pulling out some statistics that has been shown and published by Dragos, which is a company that focuses on the OT space. So what they have studied is over the years, they have seen an increase in threat groups looking at and focusing on OT. They've also seen an increase in ransomware in the OT sector. And basically, some of the OT-specific threats are also becoming more and more powerful, being able to go beyond just a specific sector, but basically cross-industrial sectors as well. Why AI? I think generally the past 1 to 2 years, we have seen a major acceleration in adoption of AI. Also because I think the technology has since made it a lot more accessible even for small organizations. So what typically small organizations would do is that they may not necessarily be the ones running their AI systems or training their own AI models, but they could be using AI tools because this is built into the software that they're using, or they could be using a very accessible service such as ChatGPT to help them in their productivity. At the same time, as organizations are embracing AI, the threat landscape is also evolving, and basically there are AI-enabled attacks. There are also attacks on the AI. So I think this is also the reason why we thought that this would be the 3 relevant areas for us to include inside the upcoming revision of the standards. So now that I've covered briefly our plans to revise the standards, let me talk a little bit more about what the standards development process. So actually, Cyber Essentials and Cyber Trust are published as a TR 106, which is basically a technical reference for tiered cybersecurity standards for enterprises, and the whole standards development process is actually measured by Enterprise Singapore. So I think in the next stage, from a TR, we will be upgrading the revision to SS or Singapore standards. So just to show a little bit about the standardization process in Singapore, which is managed by Enterprise Singapore, at the top of the hierarchy is basically a Singapore Standards Council. And the Singapore Standards Council also has several coordinating committees, one of which is cybersecurity. Under the Singapore Standards Council, there are 12 standards committee. So you can see that it goes into a whole range of things from biomedical, health, food, and so on. So I think the one that's a bit more relevant to our industry is called Information Technology, and IMDA is the Secretariat for the Information Technology Standards Committee. So what happens is that there's an entire hierarchy of committees that support the standards development work. And what we have done right at the bottom is to actually form a work group to contribute to this standardization efforts. So I think this is the ITSC structure. The ITSC stands for the IT Standards Committee, and basically, as mentioned earlier, is secretariat by IMDA. It looks at a whole range of information technology topics. The one relevant to us is actually the one on security and privacy standards. So out of this specific technical committee, we have formed a working group to look into tiered cybersecurity standards. This was a process we adopted a few years ago for Essentials and Trust, and this is a similar process that we're adopting for this specific revision. So as part of the standardization process, actually, we don't limit it to just a formation of the standards working group. Actually, we want to consult widely. So this is also one of the reasons why we have a working collaboration with ISACA to actually consult industry widely, including the ISACA community in Singapore. So I think this is an invitation to the different members here to actually participate in the thematic roundtables. So because we are going to make a revision in 3 areas, we imagine that some of you may be more interested in OT, for example, or more interested in AI, for example. So what we'll likely do is to break this into thematic industry discussions or roundtables, focusing on cloud issues, OT-related issues, and AI-related issues. So I think today's session is meant very much to provide the background and the thinking and overview of the current cyber essentials and cyber trust. In the upcoming sessions, we hope to be able to dive a bit deeper into the various revisions that we're talking about for each of the three areas. And I think this is the QR code that ISACA has kindly provided me with for members to be able to sign up in the roundtable discussion. So I'll pause here for a short while before moving on to the next QR code. Okay, I hope everyone had the chance to take this down and to scan it if you're wanting to register your interest to participate. This is the second QR code. This is actually to confirm your CP hour as well as to provide your feedback.
So this is Wendy. Thanks, Veronica. Just wanted to get everyone, participants, to actually ensure that you do give feedback so that we can register your CP hours after the webinar. But I think more importantly, I'm not sure whether you have heard what Veronica has explained. I think this is really exciting in terms of our updates to the essentials and trustmark. And I think having ISACA members having this opportunity to participate in these various roundtable sessions to provide feedback to the standards development, I think this is like really good opportunity for every member of ISACA and friends. So I would really want to encourage everyone to, express your interest to participate in the feedback as well as, sharing your inputs to the standards development. So if you need the full details again or to the QR codes, the link or the links are actually, packed into one of our chat. I think, let me see. Madeline is helping us to, put that through again in the chat box, or you can also use this. So this is the one for registering your interest to participate in giving inputs to the proposed draft standards. So please, express your interest. And then there is a second QR code. Just give us a moment. But I think there is a question I saw in the Q&A chat. So Veronica, it is not an easy question. I am going to read this out. So this is someone anonymous who wants to remain anonymous. He said that his company is part of a supply chain and that they have gone through the journey of cyber trust and also DPTM. However, I think what he's trying to say is that their international partner does not recognize the Singapore certification. So he's asking whether is there any way that CSA or IMDA can help to position for SG certifications to be recognized by international partners.
Okay, so one thing that we're doing now that we have put this out for about 2 years in the market locally is we're starting to embark on cross-recognition with different other international frameworks. So this is something that is slowly progressing. But I suppose for the specific partner that you have in mind, if it makes sense to you, feel free to reach out to me offline and we'll try to see what we can do in the shorter term to address your more immediate problem. I think end of the day, I think for your international partners, we have to remember that Singapore is sometimes seen as a little red dot. So maybe for them, they may not be so aware of what's going on in our part of the world. And we'll try our best to see what we can do to address some of the questions that we have. In the longer term, in a more systemic and more scalable, we are looking at expanding this for better awareness and recognition with other frameworks as well. But this will obviously take time.
Thank you, Veronica. I mean, this is not an isolated sort of a challenge, but I think there are various ways that by working directly with CSA and the rest of other authorities, we can find some measures, as Veronica mentioned, in the short term, how we can assist the various companies who have come forward to actually participate in the Singapore certification. I would just like to also call out for any further questions or comments. If you do have questions, please make use of the Q&A chat to actually input or raise your hand. I mean, you're not given the microphone to speak, but I think if you have anything that urgent or in mind to raise, let us know. I think personally, maybe for me, representing today as ISACA board member, I think this is actually on the right track, Veronica, where we do see various developments and interesting developments supported by government initiatives, especially CSA, IMDA, and so on. So I am very interested to participate in the sessions to actually hear from CSA yourselves on, what are some of the proposed updates that you have, as well as to contribute from industry and professional standpoint, how we can make this better for Singapore. There is a question about whether the slides will be shared. I think that's in the main chat. I think, Veronica, would you like to answer that?
Yes, I think we'll be happy to make this available. I may redact the section on the Singapore standards because this is not CSA slides, but I think for the rest, we are happy to make this available.
Sure. Thank you so much. Okay. There is another question that came through. Again, someone anonymous. So let me read out this question, Veronica. So this person is asking who should complete the cybersecurity health check? Is it the IT department or the auditor can also do this?
By auditor, I don't know whether you're referring to the internal auditor within the organization or the certification body's auditor. But I think for the cybersecurity health check or the self-assessment for certification, usually done by the company itself, like the department or the cybersecurity. In some cases, for companies that may find filling in the self-assessment difficult, I did mention that they can engage third-party partners in the form of CISO as a service providers that we have onboarded to help them to fill this in. And this is especially the case for SMEs. So once that the health plan or the self-assessment has been filled in, then you can approach the certification body. The certification body would have their own independent auditor that we send to be able to review the measures against the self-assessment.
Thanks, Veronica. Hope this answered the person's question. And by experience, definitely for the checklist and understanding your own control environment, it will be the responsibility also for the organization. But as mentioned by Veronica, you can actually get third-party external help to support you. I'm sure you will also receive a lot of internal help, but if you need more help, you can get from, I think there's a list of a panel of different providers that are available that you can reach out to.
Yes, it's published online.
That's right. So I mean, unless this person you have further questions, you can also reach out to the CSA or via ISACA. Then we can also direct you to the right information available. Okay, so before we end the session, I'd just like to ask Veronica anything else that you would like to share as final sharings. Okay, sorry.
I think there's one question.
Yes. Let me read out the question for everyone. This is a good one. What are the requirements to be part of the roundtable discussion?
I guess we don't really have very specific requirements, but we assume that if you're participating in the roundtable, and because this is also an imposition on your own time, this is an area which you are interested in and you're passionate about. Usually when we consult, we try to consult a large range of stakeholders. Some of you, especially from the ISACA chapter, you could be industry professionals with a subject matter expertise in this the same time, because these standards are eventually for end user organizations to adopt. So we also have other separate tracks where we make users organizations are the ones who actually have follow and implement all actually find that this is something that they can do or sometimes understandable. My own experience working on this is the last round that we did this, we had one interesting session where it was a split tracks. One track in the same session was all the technology professionals. Another track happening concurrently was all the end user organizations. And you can see that by the time they came together, discussions were very different, really different, like, day and night. The technology professionals were saying, oh, actually, maybe the hygiene measures need to be higher. It's too low. The end user organizations were going, oh, this is unachievable. We cannot do it. It's too high. So I think, especially for something like Cyber Essentials, it is not just purely looking at it from a technological perspective, but it's also helping to understand the balance, the trade-off, the realities of what's available out there, and sensible enough but organizations that may have to in all of the work that we have done so far, especially in the context of Cyber Essentials.
Thanks, Veronica. There are two more questions. The next one, more related to the sessions, what would be the maximum number of participants that we will cap at?
I think we've discussed this with the ISACA team, and I think some of the workshops that I've attended with ISACA, it was probably around 20 to 30 gathered around the table in a round table format. So I think that seems to be a good format. But of course, if there's superwhelmingly, overwhelming interest and it's kind of like not very practical to fit everybody into one session, I think we can explore running multiple concurrent sessions, and this way we can be inclusive whilst not ending up having like a lecture setting where it's kind of like one to many. Yeah.
Agree, definitely. Because if you actually express interest to participate, I'm sure you want to contribute. So we want to make sure that everyone that participates in the roundtable sessions, you are able to contribute. So I also agree with that, Veronica. The next question is a more general question, and you're laughing already. Wei Fong, thanks for your question. So the question here is industry ready for AI?
This is a very big question, and it's a philosophical question. If you ask me honestly, I don't really know the answer, but what we do see anecdotally is that the adoption rate has been taking off in the last 2 years. So if you look at some of the statistics that have been published, especially for AI services, the likes of ChatGPT, where it's a bit more accessible and it doesn't require the organization to be setting their own AI systems or developing their own AI models. These are a lot more accessible. So I think from the perspective, the adoption rate is growing. The other perspective is that if you look at a lot of the software nowadays, increasingly they're coming in equipped with AI capabilities as the software upgrades over time. So I think from the perspective, I think it is a matter of time that organizations are adopting AI. Are they ready for it? So I think that's where cybersecurity awareness needs to come in early. The last thing we want is to have organizations jump into something, not realizing that they could be exposing themselves unintentionally and then getting into cybersecurity or other risk-related issues. So I think for a start, getting them ready and aware would be a good start. And obviously then eventually over time, putting in place the right measures to be able to protect themselves so that as an outcome, they can glean the benefits of AI safely and securely.
Thanks, Veronica. I think we can never be sure of this because definitely there are lots of use cases and developments, and it is definitely going at an accelerating progress right now with what we see in the various use cases in different industries and sectors. Okay. I'm just going to pause for 1 more minute. Any other further questions? If not, I think, Veronica, any final sort of also call for interest and what would you like to see and hear from our members in terms of the contribution broadly?
Well, they always say that cybersecurity is a collective responsibility. So I think this is where I would like to just leave it to everyone to say, join in if you can, to share your thoughts and your perspective, especially if you have a strong interest in the three areas that we talked about, which is cloud, OT, as well as AI, and particularly in AI, where things are very new and emerging and nascent. I think that's where I think we want to collectively harness the wisdom of the crowd.
Indeed, indeed. And that's why we have this community, and all of you waking up early and joining us at 8:30 for this webinar. Appreciate the efforts as well as the interest. And what we'll do now is to collect all the feedback as well as your interest to participate in the roundtable sessions. And we'll keep everyone posted in terms of the next steps when we arrange the roundtable sessions. You will be in touch. As in, we will reach out to you. Our ISACA board members will be reaching out to you once we finalize the details for the roundtable sessions together with CSA and Veronica. Thank you everyone for joining the webinar session today, and I hope that you have a good midweek, which is a happy Wednesday. Thank you, Veronica, for your time too.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
everyone. Cheers.